In this video lecture, we're going to talk about principles of document design. This is an elementary thing that you need to know if you're going to be a technical communicator or interactive designer, or, matter of fact, if you're going to work in just about anything at all where you're going to need to create documents. There are 4 general principles that you need to know. They are called the CRAP principles for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. These 4 principles were invented by a person named Robin Williams. No, not that Robin Williams, a different one. They appear for the first time in the Non-Designer's Design book. These are basic ideas. If you really get into document design, graphic design, and the like, you'll find more and other very more sophisticated ideas, but these CRAP principles are really excellent, they're easy to remember, and they're very useful, so that's why we're talking about them. Let's define what they mean. Contrast. Contrast is making sure things don't blend into each other. So if it appears on the page or screen, it needs to stand out and not become part of the background. Repetition. Any visual element that appears on a screen or page needs to be repeated over and over again. So examples of formatting need to be repeated. That's how documents gain cohesion. They stick together. They look like they are part of a set. They belong to a visual, for example, any organization will have a visual identity program, and all the documents from that organization will look somehow similar. That's an example of repetition. We have alignment. Alignment is putting things on a grid. Most technical communication documents are laid out vertically and horizontally. If we start going onto strange angles, that gets more into sophisticated document design or perhaps fine art. But generally speaking, we're going to align our elements on a grid so that people can follow along very easily. Then we have proximity. Proximity means putting things that are related together close together. Let's see how these all play out on an actual page. Here's an example of contrast where the red arrows are pointing. I'm going to give you an example of it blown up. So the weight systems text and the main text that's following. Notice there's a lot of contrast between the two. Now, yes, there is contrast between the main body text and the heading text in black and the background in white. That counts as contrast, definitely. But look at the contrast between the text that I'm pointing to. We have text that is a different size. So the heading text is taller, wider. We also have difference in weight. So the heading text is bold. The main body text is not. Is what we call light face. Then we also have different letter shapes. So if you look at the different letters, for example, look at the E in weight. Notice where the crossbar is. Notice how round that E is. Then look at an E in conventional, the 5th letter N. Notice the E there is kind of tall. It's a squashed and skinny. The crossbar is a lot higher up than in the weight systems E. So letters are shaped differently, and that's a way of creating contrast. Here's another example of contrast in this table down at the bottom. Take a look at the red arrow. What contrast do you see between the main text on the left and the Table 1 Weight Systems Inspections on the right? Well, there are a couple of different ones. For example, the size is different. The weight is different. The fonts are different. So if you look at the main text and the heading text, again, the letters are different shapes. Let's compare between the elements pointed at through the purple arrow, the weight systems inspections and the percent of divers inspecting this item. What's the contrast there? Well, there's a lot of repetition. They're both boldface. They're both the same font, but the size is different. It's a subtle form of contrast, but it is some contrast. Take a look at the blue arrow then, where it's pointing to stitching condition and percent of divers. What contrast do you see there? The size is very similar, but the weight is different. That's, again, subtle contrast, but it is contrast. Then where the green arrow is, the other physical damage and the word functions, take a look at those. The letters are very similar sizes, but one is a different font than the other is. They're both light face, but again, they have a whole lot of contrast because of the letter shapes that are being used. Those are examples of contrast. Let's talk repetition. Everything I've circled here is an example of repetition. If you look at the headings, look at the size of those words. They're all the same font. They're all the same size. They're all bold. Look at the amount of space between that heading and the following text. It's all exactly the same. So we also have the same thing going on here. There's exactly the same amount of space between the paragraph that's ending and the following heading. Those are examples of repetition. We also have a good example of repetition down here at the bottom. Now, this is a page from a magazine that I scanned in. It's a very basic page, but still it counts. This thing is what you call a verso page. A verso is your left-hand side, and recto is the right-hand side. So right here, where that green line is, that's where we have the gutter. That is where the page comes together for the binding. So the page we're looking at is the left hand if you were opening up the magazine. Again, that's the verso, V-E-R-S-O page. And on the right-hand side, we have the recto page. So I'm going to blow up this example. It shows you what appears at the very bottom, because I know it's a little hard to read. It says 32, January, February 2009, then some blank space, alert diver, and a URL. On every every verso page, same thing is going to appear. It'll have the page number in the same spot. It'll have the month that is issued in the same spot, and then it'll have that URL in the same spot. This is an example of repetition. Let's look at alignment next. Take a look at where all these arrows are pointing. I'm pointing at the very beginning of every paragraph. Please notice how much indentation is there at the beginning of the paragraph. The answer? 0. There is no indentation. So this is an example of repetition, but it's also an example of alignment. All these first lines are aligned with the left-hand edge of that particular text column. All the text itself is just straight up aligned with that column. We're also doing the same thing on the right-hand side. This is what we call full justification. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's an example of alignment. So our alignment going on here. Check out the bulleted list here and the bulleted list here. Note, those bullets are all lined up with each other. So if I draw a straight line down from the very top set of bullets, it will intersect perfectly with the line from the very bottom line of bullets. You want to make sure all your bullets, all your numbers, all your indentations, they are all done exactly the same amount. That's alignment. We also have alignment going on here in this table. Notice, centered. Centered text is also aligned. That counts. So you can have left alignment, right alignment, center alignment. Finally, proximity. Take a look at the areas where I'm pointing here. Blow these up a little so you can see them better. Notice the amount of space that's going on. The idea here is that things that are related should be closer together. So the heading that says weight systems and the text that follows it, they are related to each other very closely. They belong physically on the page, on the screen, close together. On the box and below, though, that little exploded area, we look down, the text, then it stops that section, then it begins a new section. That big space indicates, okay, we've come to the end of a main idea, we are moving on to a new main idea.